Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur. I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Antigone by Sophocles, written millennia ago. Really, Sophocles' first masterpiece as a playwright. A play that has been performed and reperformed, read, reread, read aloud for millennia. It's a play I first encountered about 25 years ago, and I can still remember grappling with some of the ideas in here, and engaging with some, totally missing others. But it's a play that remains incredibly relevant. I think in every generation there are readers or audiences who continue to appreciate what Sophocles pushes at and probes within this play. It is not necessarily his finest play or his best play. I think that's clearly Oedipus the King. But it is a play that is probably more universal than Oedipus, I think, in a number of ways, because Sophocles pushes at the question of what do we do when we're part of a society or an institution or an organization, or there's some individual in authority, like legitimate, powerful authority over us, who says, this is how it's going to be. And we know that that is wrong. It is morally wrong. It is ethically wrong. It is irrational or not justifiable. We know that that is true. In some respects, some have referred to it as like there's a higher law than whatever the law is that has been stated, or there is a rule that has been instituted, or a policy that has been instituted that clearly runs counter to everything that is good and right. And Antigone provides an answer. It is not necessarily the answer. It is not necessarily the best answer, but I think it's an answer that audiences and readers continue to wrestle with. And so I just want to get into this. I will note that this translation by Robert Emil Braun, part of the new translation, Greek Tragedy and New Translation series, is fantastic. I think it really captures the nuance and the language and imagery that Sophocles is capable of for a modern audience. So Antigone is the culminating play of the Theban cycle, but it's actually the earliest of the ones Sophocles wrote. So this takes place after Oedipus, after the riddle of the Sphinx, after Oedipus discovering the pollution of guilt and the curse that he has brought to Thebes, the violence, in terms of Oedipus and Jocasta. And it even takes place later on after the death of Oedipus, after the rule of his sons, Eteocles and Polynices, and Eteocles ruling in Thebes, Polynices bringing an army to try and take Thebes away and rule as the monarch. And they've slain each other in battle. And so that's where Antigone kicks off, is all of that tragedy and that curse has happened already. And Antigone references that right away. She notes in the very first lines of the play, Ismene to her sister, "Let me see your face, my own only sister. Can you see? Because we are the survivors. Today Zeus is completing in us the ceremony of pain and dishonor and disaster and shame that began with Oedipus. And today again the proclamation under the rule of war, but binding, they say, on every citizen. Haven't you heard? Don't you see? Hatred marches on love, when friends, our own people, our family, are treated as enemies. No, Antigone, since the day we lost our brothers, both in one day, both to each other, I haven't thought of love, happy or painful either. Last night the enemy army left. I know nothing further. Nothing makes me happy. Nothing hurts me anymore." And right there, Antigone gets at this idea that she and Ismene, her sister, are the last survivors of this multi-generational curse that has claimed so many lives, that has literally led to a plague on Thebes earlier in their history. And Sophocles hasn't written any of those plays. His audiences would have been aware of the myths, but that's he is grappling with this from a very different perspective than we as modern readers have. That we know the story of the seven against Thebes and of Oedipus and all of that. His audiences don't necessarily know. They know Oedipus and the Sphinx. They know the curse. They know that the brothers, have slayed each other in battle. But what's going to happen now? And it's also crucial that she notes that hatred marches on love, and this idea that her family is treated as enemies, and she's referring specifically to Polynices, because as it goes on, we are told that Kreon, their uncle, who is the king, the brother to their mother Jocasta, not the son of their mother and also their father, which was Oedipus. But Kreon, as the king, has said that Polynices will not be buried. He will not receive this. And Antigone makes it clear from the beginning she's going to violate this rule. She does not find this to be a legitimate rule, and she's going to violate it. Then when the chorus comes in, we get the magnificent poetry that Sophocles is capable of, the imagery, the idea of the sun, because we're told it's sort of going to be one day, and so there are some references to that. of where the sun is throughout the course of the day. There are ideas around what has been going on. Is there this like stable position? And the leader of the chorus says, "But look, the new king of the country, Kreon, is coming. A new kind of man for new conditions. I wonder what program he intends to launch, that he should call the elders into special conference." And Kreon arrives, and we get this magnificent monologue that's deeply ironic. "Gentlemen, the state, the gods have quaked her in heavy weather. Now they have righted her. The state rides steady once again. Out of all the citizens I have summoned you, remembering that you blessed King Leos' reign. When Oedipus ruled, you stood by him, and after his destruction stood by his sons, always with firm counsel. Both sons died in one day, struck and stricken, paired in doom and a twin pollution. Now I rule as next of kin. They are dead, I am king. It is impossible to know a man's soul, both the wit and will, before he writes laws and enforces them. I believe that he who rules an estate and fails to embrace the best men's counsels, but stays locked in silence and vague fear, is the worst man there. I have long believed so, and he who cherishes an individual beyond his homeland, he, I say, is nothing. Zeus, who sees all, will see I shall not stay silent. If I see disaster marching against our citizens, and I shall not befriend the enemy of this land. For the state is safety. When she is steady, then we can steer. Then we can love. Those are my principles. The state will strive through them." And he announces this curse, this judgment that Polynices will be left literally to be food for the vultures and dogs. So his body will be torn and ripped apart. It is a great shame. It is a shameful thing in their culture for this to happen. But it's interesting that there's the great image of this ship of state, this idea that it's rocked through the storms, and this very early reference to this metaphor that continues to exist millennia later. And there's sort of two important ideas he provides here. One is that he believes that the people have a voice, that the city has a voice, that people should be able to give input, that an autocratic monarch is a bad thing. This is clearly a bad thing. Kreon is saying this from the beginning, that someone who avoids the counsel of everyone else and just shuts themselves up in the bunker and runs the show, that is not a wise decision. That is not a good decision. But he also notes that he places safety and order and law above all else, that the ship needs to be safe and steady before people can love. That there has to be a direction before people can love. That love, this experience of love, it comes after the foundation that we need to lay, and we need everybody on the same program about this. No one person is allowed to violate the laws or be better above the laws. We're all here together. And that's Kreon's idea. And he notes that the elders in the chorus have seen not only what happened, sort of yesterday and last month and last year with Eteocles ruling, but also with Oedipus and the curse that was there, the years of Oedipus, and then Laius and what happened when, before Oedipus even. These people have been through all of it. Kreon has, in a sense, as well. As the brother of Jocasta, he would have been there and seen many of these things. And he's referencing that they're sort of his group, that they, like he, have seen all of this happen and are now ready to have some new stability. And that his law is part of this. And of course, they're interrupted by the sentry who says, "Hey, we drew lots. Something bad has happened. Someone came and clearly sprinkled dirt over the body of Polynices out there. It wasn't me." And Kreon immediately starts to lose control. He suggests that there's briberies involved, that it was all done for money. He suggests that he's just going to start punishing people. And there's a real sense of violence and dread around Kreon, that despite being this new king who thinks the king needs to listen to the people and things like that, he is absolutely ready to just start punishment immediately. And then this sentry returns with Antigone, and he describes how they caught her at this task. And Kreon says, "This was a grave charge. You were free of it," to the sentry, and dismisses him. And then he turns, he says, "Now tell me briefly and concisely, were you aware of the proclamation prohibiting those acts?" Antigone's reply, "I was. I couldn't avoid it when it was made public." "You still dared break this law?" Yes, because I did not believe that Zeus was the one who had proclaimed it. Neither did justice, or the gods of the dead whom justice lives among. The laws they have made for men are well marked out. I don't suppose your decree had strength enough, or you who are human, to violate the lawful traditions. The gods have not written merely, but made infallible. These laws are not for now or for yesterday. They are alive forever, and no one knows when they were shown to us first. I did not intend to pay before the gods for breaking these laws, because of my fear of one man and his principles. I was thoroughly aware I would die before you proclaimed it. Of course I would die, even if you hadn't. Since I will die, and early, I call this profit. Anyone who lives the troubled life I do must benefit from death. No, I do not suffer from the fact of death, but if I had let my own brother stay unburied, I would have suffered all the pain I do not feel now. And if you decide what I did was foolish, you may be fool enough to convict me too. And Kreon notes that, she can't compromise, just like Oedipus wouldn't compromise, and they're the ones who are going to break. Ironically, Kreon is projecting as the most unyielding character in the play, along with Antigone. And that Antigone notes that there is a higher law than Kreon's law, that there are feelings she has that are more true than what he is setting out as the parameters of society in Thebes, and that she will value those and trust that above Kreon. And I think there's always this push of, I remember the first time I read the play, I wondered, is Antigone right to value these traditions that demand that she do these things for her family above the more modern law that Kreon is imposing right there? Or is Antigone, wrong, that was an outdated mode of life? And what Sophocles, needs us to think about is that Kreon is instituting some new rule where everybody's going to be bound by the same rules, and your loyalty to your family needs to be set behind your loyalty to the city, to the state. And I think that remains a question that people really do grapple with now. What has more authority? My allegiance to my family, or the tribalism some people refer to, or a more modern, nation state concept that we have now. But there's something about Kreon and the autocratic way that he proceeds throughout the play that make me believe that Sophocles is having us take Antigone's side ultimately, or that he at least is taking Antigone's side. Kreon's son Haimon comes in, and this provides, I think, one of the most fascinating dialogues, in part because it introduces sort of like three different ideas going on. One is a generational conflict, that Haimon and Antigone are pressing as young people against the autocratic rule of Kreon, that Kreon imposes these rules, these laws, and Haimon and Antigone as the young people are pushing in and saying, no, it doesn't have to be that way. This is better, or this other path needs to be what we pursue. And there's that part of the conflict. There's also the incredible misogyny of Kreon, where he's spouting this idea of like, you're being ruled by a woman, just because Haimon was going to marry Antigone, that he's being ruled by this woman, you're her slave. How could you do this? That there is this sense that Haimon is so far out of line to take Antigone's side, because Antigone's a woman. That automatically her voice counts as less. And then there's also this idea around the people and Haimon saying that, like, look, people in the city are saying that this is a bad idea. Kreon earlier that same day within the play, 20 minutes earlier for the performance, was talking about how you've got to listen to the voice of the people. And Haimon is telling him directly, I don't want to disagree with you, but you should know everybody's saying this is a disaster and that you cannot kill Antigone. That everybody is saying this. Everybody in the city, as I'm walking here to talk to you, is talking about how this is a bad idea, Dad. And I want to be your good son, and that's why I'm telling you this. and their argument just continues. At one point, it is my job to rule this land. There is no one else. Haimon's replied, no country belongs to one man. Nations belong to the men with power. That's common knowledge. You would rule a desert right if you were alone there. Look at him. Take that woman's side, fighting me. I'm on your side. It's you I'm concerned about. A fine son you are, putting me on the stand. It's because I can see you're making a mistake. You're a witness against yourself. What mistake? Repeating my high office? respecting it by respecting my high office, respecting it by dishonoring the gods, rotten, degraded on your knees to a woman. Everything you said was for her sake, and for my sake and yours especially, and for the nether gods as well. You can tell me I'm on my knees, but you will find that I never surrender when I know something is wrong. And he notes at one point, like, I'm arguing in a void. And so Haimon is dismissed, but Kreon does relent that he will not kill Antigone's sister Ismene. He will only kill Antigone. We then get Tiresias, who comes and says many of the same things that Haimon said about this, but he tells it in his prophetic seer way. And he describes the destruction that's going to happen, that the dogs and birds are going to rip Polynices' body apart and take them off to altars all over the countryside and pollute every single one of those altars. That not just Kreon will be at fault here, but everyone in the surrounding area within a bird's flight or a dog's run will be polluted. Their prayers and wishes will be disgraced because of this curse. But he also notes that there will be violence in Kreon's own household. And Kreon only has one surviving son, Haimon. His other son had died as part of like a ritual sacrifice earlier. And so Kreon finally, breaks down. And he doesn't want to bend, but he finally breaks down. But they first go to bury Polynices, not to go rescue Antigone from the cave where they've walled her up to die. And we don't see any of this, but we're told all of it, and we're told it in one layer. So we hear that there's there's been death, but then Eurydice, the wife of Kreon, Haimon's mother, she comes and says, "Wait a second, I heard something was wrong. Tell me what happened." And we get it then in detail. So we first hear this wave of the curse, and we're told that the sun is setting as they set out to go, bury Polynices and end that curse, and then go pull Antigone out of the cave where she's been walled up. And that's where we're then told, with Eurydice on the stage, that's when we were told that Antigone had used her robe to hang herself within the cave, that Haimon, when he saw it, screamed and was upset, and he sort of dove at Kreon with his sword, and then he curled himself upon it and then grabbed Antigone. And there's this description, but we don't actually see that. We just see Kreon come walking in with Haimon's body. And then we're told, of course, that Eurydice has also chosen to die in this horrifying day. And Kreon's final response, "No more, the end will be welcome the final day. Why don't you come at last? I'm waiting for doom. I don't want to see another day. Pray for nothing more. No man escapes the grief that awaits him. Take me away, a poor fool. I killed you both, son and wife. No, nowhere to look, not to lean, but slides from my hands. It leaps on me, it crushes." And as the chorus leaves, Kreon leaves and the chorus leaves, they note, "To be sensible and to be pious are the first and last of happiness. For the grand scheme or bold words the proud pay with great wounds. And great wounds before today have taught sense even to the aged." I think reinforcing that idea that that is not just age and wisdom that give the authority, that we can believe something that is ultimately wrong, and when it's exposed to us, we have to be willing to admit that and make a different choice. And so, as I said, I think the play is incredibly powerful. The language of the play, the way that Sophocles brings in three characters to have a triangle of discussion in the chorus, providing this sounding ground, it works. The structure works. There's this constant set of pairs, but ultimately it fundamentally becomes this question of, like, what do we do when confronted with a wrong rule, a wrong law, a wrong policy, a wrong edict? Antigone is willing to sacrifice her life for it. Haimon, in a sense, is willing to do that as well. Kreon bends, but not quickly enough, and ultimately breaks. And so is that the path? Is that the only path? Is there some other way? And I think with Sophocles, he views Kreon as Kreon is also a tragic figure. Antigone is tragic. Haimon is tragic. Eurydice is tragic. Kreon is also tragic. What Sophocles does not provide the answer to is what happens when you're confronted with someone who will never break, or a regime that that will not change its mind, even when confronted by the people or the voice. What happens then? And that's the question that Sophocles does not get at and does not answer, and that I think remains for us to figure out. As I mentioned, it's part of the Theban cycle. Oedipus, the king, is absolutely magnificent. That is Sophocles' greatest play. Although I think the Trachis is also really, really, really good. Oedipus at Colonus is interesting, but not quite on the level of those. Aeschylus had his own play dealing with ideas around the miasma of blood guilt and where loyalty within the family revenge cycle lies, and law and order with the Oresteia. He provides a very different, I think, answer and perspective. Euripides never quite seems as interested in this. He's more interested in exploring the psychology of someone like Kreon, more so I think than exploring the psychology of Antigone or the justice of Antigone, the way that Sophocles does. And Aristophanes, I think, in a sense, is willing to give women far more agency than the other players, with the exception of Sophocles here with Antigone, in a play like Lysistrata. And I'll link my video on Lysistrata in the description box below. Some of the ideas of Sophocles, the idea that born into a life that will have disappointment and sorrow, are ideas from writers like Seneca or other Stoics. I think Orwell with 1984 and Animal Farm gets at many of the same themes around an unjust society. Kafka with The Trial explores those from a much darker, more paranoid idea. And then I think there are writers like Thoreau with Civil Disobedience and numerous ideas he had that remain relevant. The same with James Baldwin, the Civil Rights Movement, John Lewis with the whole concept of good trouble. People who, again, were laying it out and saying, like, this is wrong, and I realize it's technically the law, but it's an unjust law and it's the wrong law, and protesting that. Something like Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, I think, gets at some of those ideas around the idea that there's a higher law than the laws around, the Puritan society that Hester Prynne and Pearl are part of. Certainly, Victor Hugo with Les Miserables, the entire conflict between Jean Valjean and Javert is centered on this question of was it a crime to steal for someone who's starving? Has Valjean atoned for whatever that was, and should he still be chased and treated as a criminal? And even the 1832 Rising against Louis Philippe is written in the same idea. In the 20th century, thing works like All Quiet on the Western Front that explores the hypocrisy of powers pushing for war. And even a writer like Bessie Head, I think, with her book Maru, gets at that conflict around tradition versus a modern idea, the agency of women within their culture. And for Shakespeare, I was thinking Measure for Measure is probably the closest I think Shakespeare comes to really grappling with some of these ideas. There are others, but I think that's the one where he really gets into this idea of who makes the rules, and are those fair, and are they just, and what do you do when the rules are clearly unfair? So let me know if you're a fan of Antigone or Sophocles. As I said, I really love this translation by Braun. This series is a fantastic series. The Prometheus Bound translation is the best I've ever read. This is the best Antigone I've ever read. The Women of Trachis translation is excellent. The Alcestis translation is great. It's even better than the one Anne Carson did in Grief Lessons, frankly, which is, to me, mind-boggling. But if you've ever struggled to read the Greek tragedies, this series, they all have this black cover with like a white little statue on it. This series might be a way into those. So let me know if you're a fan. Thank you.